more and more of the office products are now coming from China.
What if you believed your competitor in the office supply business was using parts assembled in Chinese prison camps?
And here you see the truck turning into the gate for the prison camp.
If you're Peter Levy, you travel there and try to catch them on video.
From that point, we followed the truck into the prison camp. The truck went into the camp with unassembled parts. The truck came out of the camp with assembled parts. Here we have the truck pulling out.
Today, Mr. Levy went to Washington with his evidence.
Very few people would go into a store and purchase merchandise that was marked made in a Chinese prison.
Tonight, one man's effort to stop American business from using Chinese prison labor. A warning at the outset. This story is not as simple as it seems. I mean, on the face of it, this one's easy. An American businessman at some personal risk collects videotaped evidence that another American firm is importing products assembled in a Chinese prison labor camp. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee hears his testimony and that of several human rights advocates. The implications are clear. Cheap prison labor makes Chinese goods more than just competitive. It makes them so cheap they're practically irresistible, which would also explain, perhaps, why the United States had a nearly $40 billion trade deficit with China last year. At a time when President Clinton has said that he intends to renew China's most favored nation trading status, the notion that these binder clips are being assembled in a Chinese prison makes for a potentially explosive story. As I suggested, though, the story may not be quite as simple as it seems. For one thing, Peter Levy, the American businessman with the camera, is no human rights crusader, as he would be the first to acknowledge he got into this because he was angry about being constantly undercut by a business competitor. Nightline correspondent Michelle McQueen talked to Mr. Levy.
How long have you owned this business?
Since 1988, so it's almost 9 years now.
Office supplies manufacturer Peter Levy says he couldn't figure out why one of his competitors, OfficeMate International Corporation, was able to offer such low prices on some common products. And then he got a tip.
Back in 1995, I had a conversation with somebody associated with the industry, and he made the comment that he had heard that OfficeMate was using prison labor to have their binder clips manufactured. And that was the first inkling I had of that.
Levy knew it was illegal to import products made with prison labor, but he thought the U.S. government could not just act on the basis of his suspicions. So he decided to investigate for himself. In March 1996, and again last week, Peter Levy traveled to Nanjing and photographed trucks traveling between OfficeMate's supplier, a sister company called Allied International Manufacturer Stationery Company, and what he later learned was a women's prison camp.
Okay, we just left the factory, and now we're following it down the road.
Last week, he took this videotape. We edited the tape at his request to obscure the identities of the people who helped him.
What we found was we saw the truck, leaving the factory in Nanjing. We followed the truck to the camp. Along the way, we had a lucky break and the traffic stopped, and I was able to get on the truck and look into the truck and see that they were some unassembled binder clip parts. And over here, you have the black bodies, which are unassembled. You can make that out pretty well, too. And then when they get to the camp, they're going to put the handles in and then return them back. From that point, we followed the truck into the prison camp, waited there for a couple hours, saw the truck come back out of the camp. And the truck has loaded, and it's turning back out onto the main road. And there you can see the sign on the door. See that again, and we're off. Started to follow it back on its way to the factory, where again it stopped. We were able to get into the truck or look into the truck and determine that they were assembled binder clip parts, and then followed it back to the factory.
Levy never photographed the assembled binder clips coming out of the prison because, he says, he was too scared. But he insists that he saw them.
What I saw was unassembled binder clips leave a factory in China, go to a prison camp, and come back assembled.
Actually, they were different colors and sizes than the unassembled parts he saw going into the prison, suggesting that the assembly work was not a one-time event.
Well, I mean, frankly, like I said before, they're breaking the law in the United States. I think they have an unfair competitive advantage over us by using prison labor. In addition, I think, clearly, you cannot make a case for using prison labor from a human rights issue.
Nightline made repeated requests for an interview with OfficeMate owner Peter Chen. A company lawyer was allowed to view the tape, but OfficeMate declined to make anyone available for an interview.
But in written statements, OfficeMate Senior Vice President Shire Chafkin said the company is, quote, shocked and dismayed, end quote, by the allegations, that the company has suspended shipments from the Nanjing factory while top company officials investigate, that the company is opposed to the use of convict labor, and if it was used, OfficeMate was deceived by factory managers. But the company also confirmed that Mr. Chen is both the owner of OfficeMate and a major investor in the Nanjing company photographed by Peter Levy. Levy acknowledged that he cannot prove that any of the binder clips he believes were assembled by prisoners ever made their way from China to the U.S. U.S. officials said today they can't either.
Has China allowed the export of prison-made materials into the United States? I don't believe we have any evidence that they have. In that sense, we believe they have lived up to the agreement.
But major retailers who distribute OfficeMate products are concerned. A spokesman for Boise Cascade, which features OfficeMate in its catalog, told Nightline the company will investigate and said the company, quote, will not purchase products that are manufactured using forced labor or under conditions that we believe abuse human rights, end quote. Staples, another giant retailer, issued a similar statement. But one nagging question that remains unanswered is why a binder clip manufacturer should feel the need to do a James Bond imitation to protect his products from prison-made imports, especially when the U.S. and China have a 5-year-old agreement that was supposed to keep such products out of the U.S. Earlier today, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee asked that question.
The logical question is China breaking U.S. law? What would be your answer?
I don't think I could say that China is breaking U.S. law. I would say that there are facilities, we believe there are facilities that that may be exporting products of prison labor to the United States. That would be a violation of U.S. law. That would be a violation of Chinese law. We need Chinese cooperation in order to identify those facilities, and that cooperation, as I say, has not been what we would like.
Administration officials said they are frustrated.
Well, we have had instances where we've actually confirmed the production of products by prisoners in prisons, but in those instances we have not been able to corroborate any evidence that those products had been exported to the United States. And so it's a tremendous challenge as far as U.S. Customs is concerned in order to meet the requirements of the statutes.
But while government officials complain their hands are tied, human rights activist Harry Wu, who spent nearly 2 decades in Chinese forced labor camps, said millions of dollars worth of goods are pouring into the U.S., many made by people whose only crime is political dissent.
My appearance today has only one purpose: to show that Chinese government has repeatedly lied about its efforts to stop the trade in about the Chinese forced labor products. There can be no denying the facts. Although I have been disappointed by the American government's resolve in the past, I remain hopeful that our efforts here today will result in a new commitment to the prevention of the trade in the forced labor products from China.
On Monday, President Clinton argued, as did his predecessor before him, that China's favorable trade privileges should be extended for another year because trade relationships push China toward improved human rights policies. But the real issue may be that Chinese-made products are so thoroughly integrated into this country's economy that there's little appetite for getting tough. Looking through my own office this morning, I discovered made in China labels on everything from this umbrella, to this eyeglass case, to the swim cap, to the mouse on my computer, even the shirt I have on. It is hard for one man's videotape to compete against that. This is Michelle McQueen for Nightline in Washington.
And Peter Levy joins us now here in our Washington Bureau. We only have time, really, for 1 or 2 quick questions. You're going to be able to go back and do business in China?
I hope so. I really don't think that I did anything that violated Chinese law when I was there. But I do understand there is some risk.
I'll bet they don't agree with that assessment of yours.
Well, I think we'll just have to wait and see how they react to that. I think, my dispute was really not with the Chinese government. It was more with one particular competitor that happens to be an American corporation.
Let me ask you this. Is it possible in China, as you know it, for any industry to operate without government connivance or at least knowledge?
Well, I think, clearly the Chinese government controls most of the industry in China, and I think, they have knowledge of most of the things that are going on there.
Mr. Levy, I thank you very much. When we come back, how does the U.S. government prevent Chinese prison-made goods from entering our country? We'll ask a key administration official and a labor leader critical of government efforts. Jeffrey Bader is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. Jeffrey Fiedler is President of the Food and Allied Service Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. He is also a director of the Laogai Research Foundation, which investigates the use of Chinese forced labor products for export. They are both with us here in our Washington bureau. Mr. Fiedler, you don't have a large investigative group, do you?
We have 3 or 4 people, Ted.
Who operate in China or outside China?
Both, inside and outside.
How is it that you are able to uncover things which apparently the U.S. government is not able to uncover on its own?
Because I think we want to and they don't.
Is that a fair statement, Mr. Bader?
Needless to say, we would completely disagree with that. We do have 2 customs officials in our embassy in Beijing. They acquire information from whatever sources they can, including from Mr. Fiedler and from their own efforts.
When you and I were chatting just before the program, you conceded to me that much, if not most of your information does indeed come from Harry Wu, and I guess Mr. Fiedler also. Am I misstating?
Harry Wu and Jeff Fiedler are very helpful in providing leads that our customs people pursue. That's right.
If 3 or 4 of them can find as much as they have found, would it not be fair to infer that if the United States government were to make a more concerted effort and devote greater resources to it, that perhaps the U.S. government could actually uncover even more?
Well, I think that the best way to find information, frankly, is through cooperation with the Chinese under our Memorandum of Understanding that we negotiated in 1992. That gives us the right to get reports from the Chinese and to visit facilities. We have only 2 people, as I say, stationed at our embassy who do this. They have other responsibilities as well, such as enforcing intellectual property rights agreements, textile agreements, so there are a number of other responsibilities that are competing.
Mr. Fiedler, what do you think it is that constitutes the greatest injustice that is done here?
Well, first of all, the agreement that Mr. Bader refers to is premised on the notion that the Chinese will provide information to the United States that shows their guilt. That's the fundamental and fatal flaw of that agreement. And so that's the injustice of diplomacy. The real injustice is the continuation of the flow of exports from forced labor camps in China.
All right, so for example, let's take Mr. Levy's example and the folder clip that I was demonstrating there before. A, how do you prove that those folder clips that do in fact come into the United States, and I should point out that you and Harry Wu were also helpful to Mr. Levy after he initiated the investigation on his own. But how do you demonstrate that those folder clips which were assembled in the prison labor camp actually made their way into the United States?
You have to do some further investigation, there's no question.
And how do you do that?
You talk to the people in that plant. That is an American company. You check all the other sources of product that they have, all the other sources of production that they have. And if you have a reasonable evidence, then you say, this is it, and stop it.
The owners of that company, Mr. Bader, are sort of taking the old Claude Rains line from Casablanca. They are shocked, they say. They are acting as though they haven't a clue. You now certainly have some compelling evidence to suggest that here is a product making its way, possibly, into the United States that was assembled in a labor camp. That would seem like a good clue for someone to follow up on.
Well, the standard of the law is if there is a reasonable suspicion that products of prison labor are making their way into the United States, the U.S. Customs Service can slap a detention order on products manufactured by that entity. That means that those products cannot enter the United States until the Chinese satisfy us that they are in fact not the product of prison labor.
Just to give me a sense then of what constitutes that kind of evidence, does the videotape that Mr. Levy brought back, I mean, is that compelling enough that it would cause the Customs Service to do what you suggest?
I think that tape would certainly be of interest to the Customs Service. I'm not a professional investigator, so I wouldn't want to prejudge.
Less has proved sufficient in the past, Ted. Less has proved sufficient in the past.
I'll tell you what, let's take a short break and then you can explain what you mean by that when we come back. More with Jeffrey Bader and Jeffrey Fiedler in a moment. We're back with Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Jeffrey Bader and Jeffrey Fiedler of the AFL-CIO. Mr. Fiedler, you were saying a moment ago that less information, less evidence than has been provided by Mr. Levy's videotape has in the past been sufficient to do what?
To put up a detention order, which is frankly just a piece of paper that the government uses to make everybody think that it's doing something on this.
That's such a cynical comment that I'm not sure where you're going with that. In other words, it means just a piece of paper that and nobody does anything?
We have 20 some odd detention orders out there, Ted, and very few products have ever been seized after. And the government always cites the fact that they have detention orders as evidence that they're doing something. And they're not, I'm sorry.
Secretary Bader, I want to preface this question by making it very clear that no one suggests that anyone at the State Department is anything but disgusted with conditions in many Chinese labor camps, and that the last thing in the world you want to have is products coming into this country that were produced or assembled in those camps. But having said that, I must also say I'm sort of confused as to what, if anything, the U.S. government is prepared to do. It doesn't have the manpower inside China, you say, with the customs official. It may or may not have enough information if an independent U.S. citizen comes with the kind of videotape that Mr. Levy has provided, and then it slaps orders against products which Mr. Fiedler says are never actually invoked. So what is the U.S. government doing to prevent materials that are assembled in prison labor camps from coming into this country?
Ted, we investigate reports from all sources when there is an allegation against a specific entity. I would disagree with Jeff about the effect of a detention order. Perhaps the reason why not many products have been seized at the borders is that the entities concerned realize that their products aren't going to get into the United States once a detention order has been laid upon them. I think that the system provided under the Memorandum of Understanding, if properly implemented by the Chinese, would be a useful step towards preventing these products from getting into the United States. I don't pretend for a moment that Chinese implementation is close to satisfactory, and we made that clear at the hearing today.
We have had, for example, when we have weapons treaties with the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, we have actually had mutual inspection agreements that would allow them to inspect American facilities, Americans to inspect Soviet facilities. Do we have such an agreement with the Chinese, and how good are they about letting us implement them?
Well, the Memorandum of Understanding of 1992 and a subsequent agreement that we negotiated in 1994 to implement that provide for inspections. If within 60 days of an allegation, the Chinese are supposed to allow us the right, our customs people, the right to investigate and visit that facility. I think we've had about 20 cases where we have sought to visit facilities since the agreement went into force. The Chinese have agreed to allow visits in 13 instances. So
excuse me,
Go ahead.
There's a very important distinction between the word visit and the word inspect. You use the example of military inspections, mutual. Those are real inspections. These are visits. There's no such word in the agreements as inspect, and the Chinese have explicitly said that that's a violation of their sovereignty. You can visit when we want, and when they want means 4 years, 5 years after the U.S. has requested such a visit.
I was actually going to ask Secretary Bader another question. Even 60 days after the fact, I would assume, for example, if you went to that folder clip factory 60 days from now, you wouldn't find any evidence linking it to that women's labor camp, wouldn't you?
Well, as I said, Ted, U.S. Customs Service can place a detention order on the products of that plant. So it is in the Chinese interest to cooperate in the investigation because the detention order can remain in place until the U.S. Customs Service is satisfied. In other words, the burden of proof is on the Chinese, if there is a reasonable suspicion, to persuade us to lift that detention order. So I don't dispute what Jeff is saying and what you just said about the the difficulty of coming up with a 100% foolproof visit or inspection. But as I say, the burden of proof is effectively on the Chinese because the detention order can remain in place.
We have only 30 seconds left. Let me ask you a very broad gauge question. Do you think you have the necessary tools to do this job and the necessary personnel?
We could do it better. As I say, we don't think implementation has been satisfactory. Obviously, 2 people doing all the jobs, all the responsibilities the customs are trying to do in China makes it very difficult to complete investigations to our satisfaction. So I think we could do better. We could obviously get more cooperation from the Chinese than we're getting.
Secretary Bader, Mr. Fiedler, thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted. I'll be back in a moment. Tomorrow on Good Morning America, an interview with the attorney for the family of the accused Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. And that's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.